Hello and welcome to the Sales Lab from Homebridge Financial, where we discuss the best sales ideas, strategies, and solutions for today's housing market. Our program is designed to share the best practices in market intelligence with builders and new home sales professionals so you can find success regardless of market conditions. Our host is Anthony Grast, National Sales Director for Homebridge Financial's Builder Division, who will lead in today's conversation. Subscribe to this podcast or bookmark this link so you can find your way back for future episodes. And now our host, Anthony.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Sales Lab, where we share some of the best sales ideas, strategies, and solutions for today's housing market. I'm Anthony Grast, host for today's event. Our guest today is Jeff Tucker, Senior Economist of Zillow. I'm very excited to have Jeff on our program because of the work he does on the U.S. housing market. Today, Jeff is going to share his thoughts on the economic forces and trends at work in today's market and how that's going to affect our future as well. I'm excited to have Jeff here. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Anthony.
Yeah, 2020 has been a crazy year. We have had a steep economic shutdown due to the coronavirus and the stay-at-home orders. The housing market and unemployment were shocked in the first quarter, and we were very worried what is the future of housing. But in less than 4 weeks, maybe 6 weeks later, the housing market had fully recovered. It showed remarkable resilience. Why did the market recover so quickly, in your opinion?
Yeah, so there were a couple factors at play there. One of them was a really strong policy response from the Fed and from the federal government at large, which really stepped in to make sure the mortgage market was still functioning, make sure credit markets were functioning. They stepped in and said they would buy mortgage-backed securities. So that helped ensure that credit kept flowing for anyone out there who did still want to buy a house. On the flip side, among homeowners who were negatively impacted, who lost their jobs or lost some of their income, they quickly got the option to enter forbearance. So we didn't have this sort of shockwave of foreclosures instead, which would have been much more disruptive to the housing market. So what that kind of left was your fundamentals of supply and demand. We saw both supply and demand take a step back in March and April. But because they seem to sort of move in tandem, prices didn't start plunging. And in fact, later in the spring and early summer, buyers really came back to the table before sellers had managed to get their listings back up. So that began the trend we've seen for the last several months, which is more buyers than normal competing over a pretty small pool of homes for sale. And I think the key factor there, that's kicking the can a bit. Why did those buyers come back? Why did they feel so confident in the midst of a recession? Partially, it wasn't hitting a lot of white collar jobs, a lot of jobs that could go and work from home. They stayed largely intact. And so a lot of those potential buyers, a lot of those 30-somethings thinking about buying their first home, they still had their jobs and incomes. And for many people, they actually needed a little more space extra this year if they're going to be working from home. So gave them one more reason to buy now. And finally, the other reason they're shopping to buy now is that mortgage rates plummeted. Not only did the Fed keep mortgage credit flowing, but it got cheaper for everyone who was able to access it and buy a house. So there was one more reason that buying looked more attractive than renting this summer, well, right up until today, actually. So that really kept buyers coming to the market.
Yeah, it's amazing the power of interest rates. Now you talk about those that were disproportionately hurt with the stay-at-home orders, and you talked about the white-collar population of workers keeping their jobs. Is it fair to say that of the initial shutdowns, that the population that was hurt was more renters than they were home buyers? Is that a fair assessment?
Absolutely. We've got a little more insight into that this year with surveys like the Census Household Pulse survey, which was rolled out very quickly to help answer some of these questions. And it showed any way you cut it, renters are experiencing more economic distress this year compared to homeowners, more likely to have lost their jobs or lost some of their income. This is partially also what we've called a K-shaped recovery since then. Not only did the shutdowns and the drawdown in-person, face-to-face economic activity hit those households harder, they haven't recovered the same way that that higher wage occupations have recovered. So by some measures now, the top paying third of jobs are fully recovered this fall, by October or November, while the bottom paying third of jobs and occupations are still deeply depressed with double digit unemployment actually in those particular occupations.
Yeah. So interesting. You talked about buyers returning quicker than sellers, but with such a strong market, I was thinking that housing inventory would rebound. In other words, we would see more resale listings coming back on. I know builders are building as quickly as they can. Housing inventory remains low. So any thoughts on why it hasn't been able to recover or keep up?
That's probably been the biggest mystery we've tried to chase down this year at Zillow. And we actually ran a survey and asked homeowners, why aren't you selling your home? And especially ones who said they would consider it in the next 3 years. And their responses included uncertainty that they didn't know what their lives would necessarily look like in the next couple of years. So maybe they felt secure this year with their job, but maybe not secure enough to make that 5-year time horizon kind of commitment of buying their next house. And that could also play into questions of, maybe I'm working from home right now. I need to wait and see if my employer will let me do that indefinitely, because that could really change my options of where I would choose to live. Or maybe they're an empty nester who, they thought they were an empty nester and then their college kids came home to do university remotely. So suddenly they do need that big empty basement and they're just going to hang on to it for another year or two. It seemed like broadly the pandemic it's literally made all of us hunker down more. And so for people who owned a home where they were pretty comfortable, that was an easy route to stay put. While for a lot of renters, it seemed to sort of galvanize them to try to get into home ownership, get a little bit more space, maybe a little sooner than they otherwise would have.
Yeah, I think, fear of the unknown creates, no action in people. So they don't make those decisions in this, but that can change. And I think that's a confidence issue. But as we move into 2021, maybe with the vaccines, that will rebound. Now, one thing that's been very interesting is many economists forecast that the shutdown recession would cause a decline in home prices, a lot of depreciation going on there. And one of the underlying thoughts there was that the high unemployment eventually would begin dragging that down. However, home prices continue to appreciate. I'm going to guess that the same factors are at work there, right? That we are seeing just demand exceed supply and not catch up. I mean, how is inventory supply holding still? Is it declining? What's going on there?
Yeah, you jumped right to it. It's a lot of demand chasing very little supply this year. So we are seeing the inventory of homes. We've seen it just shrink, and that year-over-year comparison is becoming a deeper and deeper trough all summer into the fall. It's now about 1/3 fewer homes available to buy overall than there were this time last year. That's just the cumulative product of several months now of somewhat above average sales activity chipping away at things and somewhat reduced listing activity. On a couple weeks, listing activity has managed to get back to normal, which I think is reflecting a bit of this turn finally of sellers feeling enough confidence, homeowners feeling enough confidence to list their homes. When in the Fannie Mae survey where they ask people, do you think now is a good time to sell a house? I think the news that this is a good time to sell a house has gradually gotten out there. So we see that survey show an increase in the number of people who think it's a good time to sell. But cumulatively, just that demand kept exceeding supply. That's putting upward pressure on prices. And interest rates, we can't overlook interest rates in there because it's making those higher prices more affordable, or at least offsetting a significant portion of that extra cost of home ownership, even in the face of this rapid appreciation. Soon enough, and in the next few months, I do think we'll have had so much appreciation that even these super low mortgage rates will only be offsetting a small portion of that increase.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because some of the articles that are out today are talking about housing affordability and the erosion of your house buying power because of price appreciation. And those articles and those comments go hand in hand with, I'm starting to see articles about a housing bubble where, this rapid appreciation cannot be supported. And they're drawing parallels between the Great Recession that happened 12 years ago that I lived through. I was actually in that time and remembered what that was like. Are we at the same risk today, or are the factors different, in your opinion?
That's a great question. I've been hearing this bubble talk a lot as well. I don't think we're at risk of a bubble the way we were in the 2000s. And part of the reason actually comes back to that idea of affordability and the fact that the mortgage industry and underwriters and the secondary market have learned the lessons and they're not enabling people to buy a bunch of homes that they can't afford. They're not extending the credit to people to just keep buying and keep bidding up the prices on the assumption, okay, I can't afford the monthly payment, but I'll just resell it for more in a couple of years. That kind of behavior is not what's driving the price appreciation. So, if there is sort of a downside risk related to affordability, in some sense, that's a good sign of not extending credit that people can't afford. And secondly, if that begins to drag on price appreciation, that would be a reason for the pace of price appreciation to slow down. That wouldn't be a reason. It could be sort of bumping it up to a level that's out of reach of some of the next buyers. But that wouldn't be a reason for it to come crashing down,
Right.
for the prices to come crashing down. Another important thing to think about with comparing this to a bubble is that use value, or your outside option of, rather than owning, choosing to rent. And in most of the country right now, homeownership still looks really appealing, still looks affordable relative to renting. So it's not running away from the fundamentals of, this, for most people, this isn't an asset class. This isn't something they're trying to buy low and sell high. This is a place to live. And they need a place to live. And the other way they can find a place to live, renting, is also pretty expensive right now.
Yeah. And I would say, I agree very much with your opinion there. I don't believe there's a housing bubble. I do believe there is a tipping point where price appreciation, gets to a point that it erodes home purchasing power, and maybe the market slows, or maybe appreciation flattens or even declines a little bit, but it's not a correction at the level or even near the level of what we saw 12 years ago. So, interesting year that we live in as things just continue to, grow and increase in the market right now. Speaking of that, we saw such a big shift from in-person sales to online. Have people adopted to researching and really doing a lot of the work and intel on their home purchase online? And do you think that this online buying, for lack of a better term, this online environment is here to stay?
Well, here at Zillow, we have seen a major increase in site traffic. This was a banner year for traffic growth, number of users on the site. And everyone who is using the site just spends more time on it. Every listing sees significantly more traffic than last year. So those are a bunch of clues to us that a lot of that activity has moved online. The days of loading the family into your station wagon or your SUV to drive around a bunch of open houses may be behind us. I think people are trying to do more of that top of the funnel, the broad search, try to get that out of the way online first, where it's easy to quickly sift through options. People can get a really good idea nowadays from the great pictures, the 3D home tours and floor plans that are available on sites like Zillow to narrow the choices down. I think to the extent that open houses and in-person touring with an agent are, as they become safe and allowed again, there will be a role for that type of thing, because people want to see what the neighborhood looks like. They want to see if there's a noisy neighbor or see if the house smells like mold. There are a lot of things you can't get from pictures, and that will still play a role. But I think people are going to reserve that for some of their, their top contenders, the last few homes that they're really serious about making an offer on.
Yeah, I didn't think about smell. We might need to contact Willy Wonka for the smell-o-vision. option for online. I think also demographics plays a lot into this as well. 45% of buyers today are millennials who grew up with technology. It's something they've always used, they're comfortable using. And I think that is an influencer as well in terms of the buyer behavior, but definitely agree that the use will continue. It makes it a much more efficient sales process as well for a buyer, because you're not spending so much time in the car. Now, it's interesting, this work from home appears to be sticking, meaning even with vaccines, we see organizations changing all over, specifically a lot in the tech industry around where I work, or where I live, that are allowing this continual work from home even after there is a COVID recovery, so to speak. So has work at home changed how we view our home? And are people willing, because you can work at home, are people willing to move and for housing?
I think that it is opening up a range of options that we've only begun to scratch the surface of. A lot of people are going to have new choices of where they could live. I don't want to overstate it, because there are a lot of reasons people will tend to stay put. A lot of Americans live near their family already. They don't just want to jet off to a cabin in Idaho in the woods all by themselves, because they want their kids to be near their aunts and uncles and grandparents. The two-earner household is much more common nowadays. So, even if one parent, even if one spouse could work anywhere, maybe the other one is a doctor at the hospital downtown. So that they're not just going to move out into the boonies. But for a lot of people, this is changing the option set. And especially, I think, for young people and single people, it's drastically expanding that flexibility. And it's changing sort of the access to jobs. I think a big challenge of the last 15 years was this rising degree to which to access, especially tech industries, you have to move to a very expensive metro that's going to eat up a lot of your income. And that's very unaffordable for a lot of people in other industries. So I'm thinking obviously of Silicon Valley, also up here in Seattle. New York City has a lot of these same challenges, Boston. So that flexibility to live elsewhere really may slow down some of the out of control price appreciation or lack of affordability in those places. And it could maybe shift us to a world where people are thinking more about, okay, what are the natural amenities or the social amenities that I'm really looking for when I choose a place to live. I think it's still too early to count out the cities themselves, the core central cities, because a lot of those like social and lifestyle and cultural advantages, they've also been shut down in the pandemic. The theater is dark. The sports, the sports stadium is mostly closed. The great restaurants and nightlife, it's all shut down right now. So at the moment, we're not only seeing the impact of work from home, we're seeing the impact of work from home coupled with this very unusual shutdown of all the in-person, face-to-face opportunities that cities provide. And
Right.
It'll be interesting to see, how much do those amenities carry cities forward in the future once that proximity for a short commute is less of a necessity.
I'm glad you brought up about the cities, because I think I'm seeing a lot of articles right now that are talking about people leaving the urban core, in a herd and going to buy remotely out in the suburbs or other areas. What are you seeing in your data? I mean, is that really happening?
We dug into this at Zillow using our data this year. Our results were pretty inconclusive, which, in my opinion, meant that we certainly didn't see the death of cities. We didn't see a spike in inventory of every condo owner, townhouse owner downtown listing their homes, unable to find a buyer, slashing their prices, having listings linger all month. That wasn't there for the most part. What we saw really was a hot for sale housing market nationwide. It is somewhat hotter in the suburbs than the urban areas. When we look at, say, by this point in the fall, how much is inventory down for suburbs versus the cities? It has fallen further in the suburbs. but it's not a zero-sum game. The fact that both of them could see inventory way down and strong price appreciation, that's driven by those first-time buyers. So it doesn't have to be the city's loss if we see price appreciation in the suburbs. So I think there is some truth to it, some shift in demand toward bigger homes. If you're going to have one or two people working from home full time, you probably need one more bedroom than you thought you did, at least, to be a home office. So that certainly favors the suburbs, but frankly, I do think a lot of those trend pieces talking about the death of the cities were pretty overblown.
Yeah, I was worried about that. And so that's good to hear, that while the urban may not be as hot as the suburb, it's still selling homes. So that's great intel. So Jeff, let me finish with this last question here, because everybody always wants to know, from your seat, what does 2021 look like in terms of home price appreciation and sales? I mean, what do you forecast is going to happen this year?
From what I can see, the housing market still has the pedal to the metal. We're seeing rapid price appreciation. That is driven by this huge shortfall of inventory. And that shortfall of inventory is a big hole in the typical levels. And it took several months to dig that hole. So it would take at least several months to dig our way out of it if conditions change to start causing inventory to rise again. It would take a long time just to get to normal levels. That's why we expect continued strong home price appreciation for the next 12 months. By maybe this time next year, we forecast price appreciation to begin to slow down, see a little bit of reversion to the mean. But in the meantime, these factors of super low inventory and strong demand, which are going to drive things. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the biggest reason we foresee strong demand is just demographics. There are so many people in the key age range of first-time home buyers right now. There's just a literal bump centered around age 30 in the age distribution of the country. That means about 5 million more people aged 26 to 35 compared to, say, in 2010. That's about 12% more. That is a lot more first-time buyers. And you compare that to, say, the rate of how many new homes are sold. Even with a really strong home building industry, that clocks in around 1 million new home sales a year. So as a sense of perspective, what does it mean when 5 million extra people are trying to buy their first homes? That could be 2 or 3 million new households. That is a major force, a fundamental force of demand for new housing, which I think will keep price appreciation and sales going strong for the near future.
Well, that's great. I'm excited to hear that. For all of our listeners who listen to our podcast, who are watching us on video, we're all in the real estate industry. So that's good news, both about the demographic wave that is coming and we're in the middle of right now, as well as the other factors driving the real estate market forward. So Jeff, thank you so much for being on our program today. Really enjoyed having you and for the insights that you shared with us on terms of the economic forces and trends at work today. For all of our listeners online, thank you for listening to our program today and have a great week.